welcome back to the Creating Synergy podcast. Today, we're joined by an absolute visionary leader, Mr. Martin Westwell. From the academic world of Cambridge and Oxford universities, Martin is now the CEO of South Australia's Department of Education, where he's reshaping how we think about learning, leadership, change, and the future of our education system. Welcome, Martin.
Thanks very much, Daniel. It's great to be here.
Very, very excited about this. We've had a couple of conversations leading up to this, and I've come back both of those times really invigorated with listening to you speak, actually. So your brain is something that I absolutely love. So I just want to start off with a question. As CEO of South Australia's largest employer, Department of Education, it's a big gig with over 32,000 employees. I'm curious about your purpose in life, why you're here, and what difference do you want to make in the world?
Yeah, well, so you start with the big one.
Yeah, no, why not?
Look, I think, when we think about, just kind of the lives that people lead, education has such a big impact on that. Kind of started with a bit of more of a sciencey background, but even in that, when I was doing that work, you were always kind of trying to strive to do something that's going to be useful, that was going to change people's lives, that was going to help people. And I think in education, the more I've been in education, the more I realise what a big impact that it does have on people's lives, how it changes people's trajectories. You kind of can see it around the world and in the history of education. Yeah. How when education was introduced, how when in societies where female students started to get educated and what difference that made to society. There's some big things. But there's also the little ones as well. I remember talking to a colleague from another state, and they said to me, I talked about what we were doing, and he said, Martin, you can't change the world one kid at a time. I said, what are you talking about? That's the only way in which you change the world. That is how you change the world. Yes, within your system, but you've got to be mindful of the one kid at a time and how you do things. So I think that's a strong drive. I think that's a strong driver for so many people, and certainly for me too.
Absolutely love it. So to understand then your purpose and understand the person that is sitting in front of us today, what do we need to know about your earliest context? Let's go back right to the start.
It's funny because you often a bit uncomfortable talking about yourself, right, in your history. But look, so, my background, grew up in the northwest of England, industrial ascent, not doing perhaps as well it had done in the past. Went to...
Was that in Wigan?
Wigan. So Wigan, which is in between Liverpool and Manchester. So, cotton mills, coal mines, rugby league. Yeah. So kind of real industrial heartland stuff. Yeah. And growing up in Wigan, went to primary school that was, almost all the other kids there were social housing, and almost every kid there was from social housing. And so, the notion of even kind of going to university as a kid, going through to high school wasn't really a thing. My dad was an electrician, his dad was an electrician, my brother's an electrician, my son's about to become an electrician,
Wow.
I always thought that was going to be my pathway, which would have been great,
Sparky's earned a lot.
Yeah, right. But, found myself good at the kind of school stuff, went on to, you do your last 2 years of schooling in that part of the world in a different place, and I did it at Wigan, what was Wigan Mining College, Wigan Technical College. And so, there were students around doing the vocational education, and then there was this kind of academic stream that was going on in the corners. And I turned out to be, quite good at that as well. So I started to think about perhaps a slightly different pathways that were open to me. But certainly, saw lots of kids, lots of people's lives that, just some poverty, not having a lot of money, what that did to people, in terms of their kind of the aspirations, just the kind of that equity in society. So I think there's kind of a lot of that I carry with me too.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about your parents. You mentioned your dad there being an electrician. What philosophies did they bring you up with? What was some of their core foundational that? Because obviously you broke the mold almost in a way, going to the universities and following the academic path, as opposed to, as you said earlier, electrician. So tell us a little bit more about those philosophies that your parents taught you and gave you a good foundation for life.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because sometimes you don't know what they are when you kind of look back from here.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, well, as a kid, you're not thinking about it. Yeah.
So I think you know, even as my career progressed, I remember my dad saying to me, so what do you do? What do you make? What do you fix? What, people pay you for that, you know?
Yeah. I get that as a consultant every single day.
And so clearly the kind of world I was entering into was quite alien, quite different. You know, my mum had worked in a bank, and actually my dad had a little company, you know, with his brothers doing electrical contracting. My mum worked in the office there, you know, it's the family deal. But, you know, without kind of making it sound too trite, I think, you know, he worked really hard. I mean, he worked really hard, and so did my mum, and they, you know, put a lot of themselves into, you know, into the business and into their work. And, you know, so many people you have on the podcast, you know, do the same sort of thing. I was talking to somebody today about, you know, it wouldn't matter if we were, you know, whatever job we were doing, if we were sweeping the roads, we'd be doing it for 60 hours a week. We'd be making the most of it. We were doing a great job. We would just be working hard at it. And I think I get some of that from, I know I get that from my mum and dad and the expectations. And like if things are not working out, you know, so I remember my dad being away for a while I was a kid, and it's because he was off working in Saudi Arabia because the business wasn't going so well. There wasn't much money coming into the house. And so plan B, you know, what we're going to do? And that's what he did. And he went off and did that. So that's clearly something that I got from them. And I think as well, you know, even though they didn't understand that world I was entering into, they were really supportive, you know. So standing back to let me do my own thing, but supportive enough to say, you know, keep going, do this. You know, these are good choices, and trusting in me, I reckon.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Well, is there a memory that you look back on now and just smile about when you look back at your childhood and your upbringing?
Look, so many stories. I think, you know, we had lots of cousins. We used to go camping. All the, you know, my dad and he had quite a few brothers and sisters, and there'd be a few of us, and we'd all go camping together. You know, so there'd be like 30 kids. Yeah. You know, cousins and their mates we went on holiday.
That would have been so much fun.
Yeah. So those days, just kind of, you know, it was in the UK, right? So we were down on the beach, but it's a different
type
gig when you're in Wales. You know, it's kind of time to come out of the water when your lips go blue. You know, but we were just off and roaming, and you know, and some of those days were just absolutely magical.
Yeah. I love it. I absolutely love it. That's one of my favorite questions, actually, just reminiscing on the nostalgia that comes with it. So what happens from here? You decide the academic path is the world that you want to embark on, and not only did you break the mold, but you ended up at one of the most prestigious universities in the UK, in Cambridge University, and then later at the Oxford University. So can you tell us about that journey and the journey to academics?
Yeah. So, you know, it's a funny time. At the time, most of the students in the UK that go to university, you go away from home. You go to university in another town. And so I'd drawn this kind of almost this circle around home, 100 kilometres, and said, you know, it's got to be outside of that. Yeah. You know, it's got to be far, you know, a bit further away from home for the experience of being somewhere else. So I was looking for that, but, you know, I was doing quite well at school, college, towards my A-levels. So I started to look at some institutions and started to kind of think, oh, maybe I could do this thing. I was getting good predicted grades. Maybe I could do this thing. Went and visited Cambridge and hated it.
Yeah, really.
So everybody was posh. They weren't me. I didn't feel any sense of belonging. I just didn't seem like it was a place where I could be. And then somebody else that I knew had visited and had been to Churchill College, which was a modern college outside of the centre of town, set up in the late 50s, early 60s. And actually had a load of state school kids at that college, and it said, you know, it was a completely different feel.
Felt more like
So applied, went there, and it was just perfect for me. So it was that kind of that stimulus that I was looking for, the learning, the academic stuff, the being away from home, and you know that stepping stone of kind of living in a college. So you know you're not out on your own, but it's a great stepping stone, that independence that you get. And as an undergraduate, just the people that you're surrounded by, you know, so there's people from all over the country, all over the world, in fact, but all wanting to do learning. Yeah. And, you know, at school, I was pretty good at school. Didn't really feel like it was a competition, probably because I was, you know, from where I was from, there were only a few of us perhaps who were performing at the level that we were. So there's a bit of competition between us, and it was friendly competition. Got to university and didn't feel that at all, actually. It was much more like we were in it for each other.
Yeah, that's great. This is the real world now.
Yeah, right. So that was really, really great. Did my undergraduate degree there, and then stayed on for my PhD as well. And that's a different experience, because again, you're there with, I was actually doing chemistry. I was coming from a science background, and so the academics, once you start doing a PhD, you start to get to know all the academics a bit more, and just their thinking, and just getting kind of blown away by this amazing work that's going on. So I was just so lucky to be in that kind of environment, and PhD supervisor was an absolute inspiration to me as well. So those Cambridge days were, just the focus on learning, the focus on being in it together, the friendships, the collaborations that we built. It was amazing.
Yeah. So what did you study? I mean, I know, but tell us what you studied and what you found out on that journey.
Yeah, so it's a long way from where I am now.
I can imagine.
So did a science degree focusing on chemistry in Cambridge, and so I wanted to carry that on. I was looking for interesting problems, interesting challenges, and so the technical part of it was looking at how molecules change, how proteins and receptors and things in your body change at kind of almost an atomic level when drugs bind to them, or when neurotransmitters or other things kind of connect to them within your body, and just how the fundamentals of how that works. But we were using things like, we were looking at antibiotics and how antibiotics stick to bugs to kill them, because we started to get this insight. We started to see how actually you could see how you could make antibiotics be more effective. And so some of the research that we did actually got picked up by pharmaceutical companies and became products. You could really see that, the work that you were doing, this fundamental work, based on evidence, based on, lots of hard thinking, could flow through into a product that reached the edges, that was changing people's lives. So, so that work was fantastic. And you
caught the bug, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right. And then from there, did my PhD, stayed for a year doing research. That year research was amazing. Again, met some incredible people. And then I had the opportunity to go to Harvard University, and I had a job there in working for the guy who was the head of the Department of Chemistry in Harvard. But I just got married, and Val's a teacher, and we were struggling to get her qualifications recognised in Massachusetts. So we started to look for a plan B, and there's a job came up at Oxford. It was a great job. It was a junior research fellowship, which is a job where essentially they give you some funding and leave you alone.
Yeah, there you go.
Do what you want, whatever you want to do. They're kind of back in the jockey and not those.
It's an absolute dream.
And I got that job, and so we moved to Oxford, and again that was a kind of another step of being in an environment where you're just meeting these incredible people, being able to do incredible work. The chemistry department gave me a corner space to work, as long as I kind of did some of the first year lectures that nobody else wanted to do, and the first year exams and things. So I was happy to start there and do some of that.
And so where does the science of learning come into all this, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so as I made that kind of transition to Oxford, I started to look at the kind of skills that I had and the research that I wanted to do, and started to look at some of the molecules that are involved in things like Alzheimer's disease. And so that got me into the neuroscience. And as I got into the neuroscience, started to get more and more into the science of learning. So what was going on in people's brains, how that was occurring, and that got me into the science of learning. And I'd always had this kind of learning strand. When I was in Cambridge and during my Oxford days, we were always teaching in the universities. But when I was in Cambridge, one of the things that I recognised was there was a load of students from state schools, northern state schools like me, who weren't even applying to Oxford and Cambridge because they thought it was something that it wasn't. In the same way that I did when I first visited. And so there was a bunch of us who got together, all state school kids got together and asked the university for the list of schools that didn't send anyone to Oxford and Cambridge. And we divvied those lists up between us and went out and visited those schools and said, it's actually like this. This is what it's actually like. Don't not apply because you think it's something that is, if you're good enough, you're good enough. And so that had led to, just more going to schools and doing education stuff. So I'd always had this kind of education sense in me, and so got attracted to the science of learning, both from a neuroscience point of view, from kind of chemicals in the brain, cells transmitting with each other, through to then the kind of cognitive science about how people think when they're learning, what stops people from thinking, what stops people from being curious, what helps people to be curious and engaged and do effective learning, and just got pulled further and further into that world.
I feel like I'm getting pulled in now. So what are the answers to some of those questions? What is the science of learning, and what was some of the eye-opening research that you think that has stuck with you throughout your whole career?
Yeah. So, one of the things that lots of people know is that, you make more brain connections during the early years than any other time in your life, right? So that's really important.
Yeah, you're like a sponge, so to speak.
Right?
Yeah.
So this notion of plasticity, you make all these connections. Every experience that you have potentially makes new connections between brain cells, or reinforces those connections. So lots of people understand that. But as you go through life, I think one of the things that people perhaps don't know quite so much is that you'll lose more brain cell connections in your adolescent years than any other time in your life, other than when you're perhaps really old.
Okay.
Because what you're doing in adolescence is you're pruning away all those connections that you don't need anymore.
Yeah, correct.
Okay? Yeah. So you're becoming the adult you're going to be.
Yeah.
You're taking away some of those connections. And so we think about the early years as being a child development, brain development period, but we don't really think as adolescence in that same way. So so there's something really important there, I think, in terms of how kids are learning and how that develops. I think some of the other things that are interesting is about how people get influenced, how people change and get influenced. So, what seem to be kind of silly things around brain cells connect, and this connection gets stronger with repetition. Yeah. So if you do something over and over and over again, what your brain's trying to do is say, well, you don't have to think about that anymore.
Correct.
You just know how to do it.
It's like driving to work every day.
Yeah, right.
And then you rock up and you didn't realize you go through a red light.
Right? Exactly that, right? So because your brain's trying to help you to not think about everything. Yeah. But that repetition.
Is that where complacency comes in?
So I think there is something about complacency there. There is something about kind of going with your groove, not thinking outside of your groove. But of course, what also happens is people can use that to manipulate you. Yeah. So if you hear a thing over and over again, and now that can be used in a positive way, or it can be used in a negative way. So what we started to see through this new science of learning work was how technology was changing the way that people think and the way that people are using technology to influence people. We also started to see...
Sorry, can we just touch on that?
Yeah.
I mean, in the world of politics right now, and in the world of... we know everything. Everyone knows what's going on in the US, and social media... I'm seeing people who I didn't even think were political posting stuff now about conspiracy theories, and it is having a huge impact on the way people are thinking. And I've never seen more of a divide in the world than anyone. And I think one thing that I've picked up is that actually people haven't got the ability to think about it from different perspectives.
Yeah.
They only see it from the tunnel in which they view it. And can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we see, again, from the kind of science of learning is this notion of people being able to stop and think. And some people might have not know Kahneman's work. There's a great book about thinking fast and slow. Yeah. And so the stop and think is doing the slow thinking. It's letting that first thinking, the fast come, recognize that it's come, flow over you, and go, okay, so what's my second thinking? Yeah. And a lot of what goes on with this notion of kind of the repetition, the being in an echo chamber with social media, a lot of the kind of emotive language that used, all of this is designed or has evolved to drive your first thinking, drive your emotional response. And so, if I give an example, with the vote around the voice to parliament, without getting into the politics, or even, I have a very strong view, but without taking a side either way on the referendum should have been a contest of ideas. We had an idea, and there could have been an alternative idea, and we should have had that contest of ideas, and then people vote on that. We didn't get that. We got an idea, which is slow thinking. You got to dig into it. You got to understand what's going on here. You got to ask yourself some questions about it. Versus, if you don't know, vote no. If you don't know, vote no is an appeal to fast thinking. It's an appeal to emotion. Yeah. It allows you to get away with not thinking.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And from a marketing point of view, that's an absolute genius. Master move. Yeah. And having someone from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders community saying, I don't know what this is about and I don't agree with it, just completely wiped it out.
Yeah. And so I think from the point of view of, if you're going back to the science of learning, from the cognition point of view, if we'd have been better at being able to stop and think, we'd have gone, don't be stupid.
Yeah.
No, hang on.
Yeah.
What's the actual alternative? What's the alternative idea?
100%.
What's the argument against? And then we could have voted, and whichever way it fell, at least it would have been on people's decision making, on people's judgment, rather than this kind of emotional response.
So tell me, this is a good example, and again, don't want to get political, but this is just an excellent, because I remember when that Voice to Parliament came out, and I had many people, lots of them would be in my family, which love them or hate them, they are who they are. They would ask me, I don't understand this, tell me about it, or whatever. And then I would then explain them the process. And it would almost be, oh, well, that's just too hard, I don't know, I'm just going to stick with what I already know. Why did they, and I know I explained it well, because I knew it intrinsically. Why do people, even when given the information, just go, nah, it's too hard, I'm not going to, like, why aren't they willing to learn more in that moment?
Yeah. So, obviously there's a number of things going on. I think some of the things that some of the threads that we might pull on is people do try and, there's a natural impulse to do the path of least resistance. Yeah. So if it's hard thinking or not thinking, or then the path of least resistance is not thinking so much about it.
Yeah, correct.
I think there's also something about one of the things that we see from people's cognition, and this kind of sounds obvious, but people future discount quite heavily, meaning that we value the right now versus more. We value the right now more than we value the future. So the psychological experiment is, I'll give you $10 today or $50 tomorrow. Okay, so I'm going to say the $50 tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely.
$10 today or $50 next week. $10 today or $50 next month, next year. At some point, you're going to flip,
Correct.
and you're going to. I'll take the $10. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm not waiting 2 years for this stuff.
Yeah, because this thing in the future has got less value than it does right now.
Correct.
So that's the experiment. The way in which we see it is things like climate change. We know in the future what a big deal it's going to be, and yet our psychology, our cognitive makeup, stops us from collectively panicking. And going, let's do something about that, you know. And so we get caught up in the right now and the impact of right now, but the impact in the future is enormous.
And it's like my weight though. When I go to the pantry every night and eat that chocolate bar. That's
right.
Yeah. Even though I know that an apple a day keeps the doctor away, but I don't have an apple every day.
So we know all these things, but we are driven. We've got lots of drivers to not act on them because of today. So I think there's some of that's going on as well.
Because there's always tomorrow.
Oh, look, I think we're built like that because there's something about using the resources that you've got, not wasting the resources that you've got. Sometimes you find yourself, you're going to, in an evolutionary point of view, you're going to find yourself and you've got these resources, well, let's make the most of them now because we don't know what tomorrow's going to look like. Yeah, so the more uncertainty there is in the future, the more discounting you're going to do because you might as well take the $10 today because you're telling me it's going to be $50 next week, but maybe it's not because anything could happen between here and there. Yeah. So I think that where there's more uncertainty and ambiguity, we tend to do that discounting more.
Did you ever do any research around the success of which mindset worked more? Like for those who were out of delayed gratification, was that more successful in life? Were they more successful in life than those who were impulsive?
So one of the pieces of research that I didn't do but really kind of changed the trajectory of my career was a longitudinal study that was done in Dunedin in New Zealand, and they followed kids from
Been to Dunedin,
You might have met some of these people. They followed 1,000 people from when they were born through to their 40s. Yeah. And what they found was that kids' ability to stop and think, this executive function, self-regulation, but it's essentially just being able to stop and think. Kids' ability to stop and think predicted that them as adults, it predicted a whole host of things. If they were more able to stop and think as kids, they became adults who could stop and think. They were less likely to be incarcerated. They were less likely to have unwanted pregnancy. They were more likely to be in a higher SES situation, more likely to have a higher income, have better health outcomes, a whole host of things. And there were some kids who, this was just a longitudinal following the kids, but there were some kids, for whatever reason, moved and increased their ability to stop and think during their teenage years. And their outcomes were predicted by where they ended up, not where they started out. Yeah, okay. Right? So for me, that research, the reason why it was so important was because it said, well, you can see this correlation, and kids from poorer backgrounds tend to have lower self-regulation skills, stop and think skills. But if you increase those skills, their outcomes as adults are much better than if you don't.
Mm.
Kids from poorer backgrounds on average, end up being adults in a poorer situation, unless you can break that cycle. And one of the ways to break that cycle is through helping them to develop these cognitive skills of being able to stop and think. So once you know that, once you know that, that has to become part of our purpose of helping to change people's lives.
So my follow-up question is, for those parents listening in, or even leaders within businesses who are leading people who are more emotive, how can we, or what are some of those, I guess, hacks, if that's the right way of saying it, to train our children and teams around slowing down and stopping and thinking?
So I think there's a lot conspiring against parents and kids these days around that. Sometimes school seems to be quite fast. Yeah. But as we said, technology, the infinite scroll, the reward of the thing, the being in the moment, the staying in the moment, and the next moment. Well, that speed works against people. So I do think it's slowing down. I think that some of those stop and think skills, the way in which we can develop them are through some of the games that we play with our kids. Even things like musical statues. That's a inhibition. It seem like silly things, but actually all these little things add up to a lot. Things like, if you're driving around with your kids or walking around with your kids, getting your kids to navigate. Yeah. And if they say go right when you're supposed to turn left, go right. Yeah. And then asking the questions, do you recognise anything? Oh no, what should we do? So the heart rate's going a bit for the kid, a bit of adrenaline's going for the kids. We're a bit lost. Yeah. Okay, so how are we going to get out of this? What should we do? How to talk about, and then going back. And so there's a whole host of things, I think. Yeah. Even things like playing board games with kids. Yeah. But all these opportunities really to just get them to stop and think.
I did this exercise with my kids. It's an old YouTube clip. I remember I saw it a long time ago, and I did the same thing with my kids where I got them to, I said, right, I'm going to make a sandwich. You need to describe everything that I need to do. And it would be like, and they would be like, get the plate out. So I'd get the plate out and I'd just hold it. And they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I've got the plate out. Now what? And they're like, I'll put it on the bench. And all right, so put the bread on the bench. And so we'll then put the bread on the, and butter the bread. So I would grab the butter and put the whole tub of butter on the bread. They're like, what are you doing? You're an idiot, Dad. But I was like, no, it's about actually being descriptive with what you're wanting to do and stopping and thinking. And on that point, though, I had a conversation. I've got two daughters. One's 12 and one's 10. My 12-year-old, almost 13. She's in that thought process now of wanting to start and work. She's like, I want to start earning some money and whatnot. And she's like, do you reckon, McDonald's, this, that, the other? And I kind of, having the entrepreneurial streak, I kind of said to her, there's so many other ways that you can make money as opposed to trading your time for cash. Why don't you, instead of the 5 hours you spend at McDonald's, why don't you go online on YouTube and learn how to start an online shop or something like that? And she was just like, why would I waste 5 hours? And I'm like, hang on, but you waste 5 hours on TikTok, no problems at all. So when it comes to, anyway, we got to a point where we're going to go down that path, but that's a conversation for another day. But what it got me thinking was when it comes to mindlessly scrolling for 5 hours versus 5 hours of actual learning, why we know the learning is going to help us in the long run. Why are we not? And is that, again, part of that fast and slow?
Yeah, I think it's the fast and slow, it's the future discounting. I mean, you said it. We know it's going to help us in the long run, but we're asking young people to invest now for a payoff later. Yeah? Whereas the infinite scrolling, the payoff's immediate. Yeah. So there is something about that ability. Again, it's to stop and think, right? So to know that you can get caught in this loop of infinite scrolling, of getting the feedback, getting the reward from doing this activity. So really, this kind of, it's a metacognitive strategy, right? So you've got to understand your own thinking and go, I know what's going on. I know this thing's trying to influence my thinking, and I am going to actively break that cycle. Yeah. That metacognitive skill, that ability to stop and think, to go, hang on. Yeah. This thing's trying to manipulate me. Yeah. The reason why I keep getting these things in my feed, the reason why people keep repeating these, 3 words over and over and over again is because they're trying to influence me. That knowledge of how your thinking works and being able to escape from it, recognize that, it's influencing me, and that's all right. That's my first thinking. That's my emotional response. But being able to stop and go, yeah, but if I'm going to be successful, if I'm going to achieve the things that I want to achieve, I need to do this learning. One of those pieces of work around adolescence and that future discounting, one of the ways of getting them out of it isn't that to tell them that they're going to be more successful in the future. Is to get them to imagine what that success would look like. Imagine yourself in this situation.
Yeah.
Now imagine yourself in the situation where you spend all your time doing the infinite scroll. You know, can you see yourself in those two? So it's not knowing about it, it's feeling it.
Yeah.
You use the fast thinking to drive a positive response, because just cognitively knowing a thing isn't enough to drive people's behavior.
I like that. Yeah, hit him where it hurts. I love it. So we went down a little bit of a rabbit hole there. Let's come back up. Let's keep the trajectory of Martin's life. What does that look like? Where from here? Science of learning, Oxford.
So Oxford, had some incredible experiences at Oxford, again, that kind of shaped me. You know, the head of the college was a guy who had been the headmaster at Eton, which was just so out of my world, you know. And yet Eric and his wife Poppy were just incredible mentors for me, and Val helped us to fit into that world. That was just incredible. And again, it helps you in the moment, but it helps you think about the kind of person you want to be. You know, when you're, not the 25-year-old who's just turned up, doesn't understand what's going on in this place. And then as you go through your life, kind of reflect on some of those experiences, like you're saying, with your parents. Yeah. You reflect on some of those experiences and think about how, they're helping you to become the kind of person that you are. Incredible experiences and meeting people like Norman Heatley, who had worked with Florey on developing penicillin. The first.
Oh, wow.
And just Heatley was amazing. He was 95 when I was there, researching antibiotics, had been working in antibiotics. I'd go around to his house and sit in front of his fire, these big leather chairs. He'd use that process of making penicillin, his fermentation, and in his later years he used his fermentation expertise to make beer. Sit with this guy. He's telling me about how they used to rub the mold that makes penicillin. They used to rub it in the lining of their coats because it was the war, and if the Germans invaded, everyone would just be able to grab the coat and leave, and you'd have a sample of the penicillin mold that you could use then to start up penicillin production.
Yeah, wow. So
just, some of these amazing experiences, again, that kind of, as a young bloke, really influence you. And
absolutely.
You've seen that, and I think with like Norman, and sat down at lunch one day, and some visitor to the college across from me, and I kind of recognised this old guy, and chatting in his American, and starting putting it all together, and it was Jim Watson of Watson and Crick who discovered the structure of DNA.
Oh wow!
And again, as a young bloke working in biology, chemistry, these are just amazing experiences. But what's really interesting is you realise that they're just people.
Yeah.
So you read about them in books and in your research and those things, and it's amazing. It's like literally world changing. But he's just a bloke.
Yeah.
Both
loves a beer.
Right, loves a beer. Yeah. And these two were blokes, but and in both of those stories, incredible women. Dorothy Hodgkin in the antibiotic space. I've got pictures of her on my wall in my office. Rosalind Franklin in the DNA story. So these people who, through their work, have changed the world.
Yeah.
Who have really influenced the world, and it gives you confidence that you actually can make a difference.
Yeah.
It takes people. It's not systems. It's not science as a global endeavor. It's the people that make the difference.
Yeah, I love that. And I have the same learning outcome from having, I speak to a lot of really amazing people. I mean, Mark Randolph, the very guy who created Netflix, sat on that chair that you're sitting on right now, right? And he's just a human. He was just normal. I thought, this person who's created literally the thing that's changed the world, probably the infinite scrolling world as well, the infinite series binge world, but just a normal human. And, we've had entrepreneurs, we've had CEOs of the like, and every time you get in front of them, they're just passionate about life. They're passionate about doing some good stuff, maybe leaving a little bit of a legacy. But yeah, I think, I'm with you on that. It's really humbling when you get to experience that.
But I think it makes you feel like you can do something,
100%.
Yeah. And so, those experiences, then I did a bunch of things, kind of worked in biotech for a while, looking at drug discovery around neurodegeneration, things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. I did some work worked in central London for a while, working on some science and civil society projects, and then went back to Oxford for worked at a thing called the Institute for the Future of the Mind.
Mm-hmm.
That was a great job. That was James Martin, who was an alumnus of the university, gave the university something like $300 million to be more outward facing, to have an impact in the world. We're doing this amazing research, but often the audience for it was other researchers. And so a number of schools were set up within this, or a number of institutes within this school, and one of them was the Institute for the Future of the Mind, looking at how technology changes the way that young people, and particularly old people, think. So that really got going on the science of learning and that work. And in fact, that was the work that brought me to South Australia in the first instance.
Yeah, great. So deep dive into that more. I'd love to learn more about the work, and then how you came to South Australia, and then why you decided to stay as well.
So that work really kind of shaped me again, because it was so focused on having an impact. The work I'd been doing before on the antibiotics ultimately had an impact, but you weren't doing it for that really. You were doing it for its own scientific sake.
Correct.
This work was to say, well, there's all this research out there. Maybe we don't even need to do any more research. What we need to do is to make sure it's actually changing people's lives. It's actually having an impact in the community. So that put me in that space between schools and neuroscience. Not to say that we're going to replace the expertise of teachers, but how could we complement it and help teachers and systems to make better choices that were more impactful for students, were going to make a difference to people's lives. And I think that's something I've kind of carried through with me. The work, though, was, we were looking at things, way before COVID and remote working, about how does technology and using technology as an intermediary in relationships between people, how does it change the way that people work? How does it change productivity? We know that, the old days we measure the distance between people's desks, and you can see this relationship between the productivity, the collaboration and productivity, and the distance between the desks. Well, now when you use technology, that distance has gone, but you get this virtual distance. How do you know how to trust someone if you're only engaging with them virtually? How do you, those things, when you send an email and you do it in a particular tone of voice, and you've got that in mind, but clearly when somebody gets back to you, they've read it in a completely different tone of voice, and they're a bit upset by it. Another email is not going to do it. You have to put more of your personal self into it. So you're going to phone them, so there's more of you in that conversation.
Correct.
Or even better, you're going to go around, you're going to go to their office and have a coffee or whatever, just to make sure that your social presence is in this relationship.
Correct. There's a bit of self-awareness in that, though, too.
Yeah.
A lot of people will just fire back the next email because it's easier. It's like, hang on, how dare you misinterpret the way I wrote this?
So it's interesting, isn't it, that you say that, because I agree entirely. But what happened through COVID, of course, was we went and did the remote learning, the remote working. We went and did the remote working, but we didn't have the conventions for it. We didn't really understand that if a project's just getting going, or it's got some problems, or even a celebration of a particular piece of work because you've just reached a milestone or something, something worthy of a bit of a celebration, that you've got to do that face to face. You've got to put some of the effort in. I remember in a previous role, a team had done something amazing. I was the chief executive. I went and taught the little morning tea or the celebration they had, and their manager was on his face was on a laptop in the car. You're not getting the social glue, the team, that sense of belonging, sense of shared endeavour and shared success that will drive you forward. You're not getting that if you're not in the room together.
I 100% agree. Yes. We, even for me personally, and we as a business, SynergyIQ, the business I run and operate, is one that I absolutely am open to people working from home, and I get it, right? Like, no problems. It is what it is. But for every Monday I host my leadership meeting, and for whatever reason someone might say, actually, I can't make it in today, I'm going to be working from home. It actually really doesn't upset me, but I think we just have such better quality conversations when we're in that room together than what you do when you're online.
I think that's right. So when it's flexible working, and we know what working from home is good for, we know what being together is good for. When when we are working from home and we've got that isolation that comes from using the technology, we end up trading on the relationships that we built through the face-to-face. And so the less time you spend investing in that, the less you've got to trade on when you are remote from someone. Someone's not going to do you the favor. Someone's not going to make sure that you're included in something if you're never there, if you're always online. There's a piece of work that was done a number of years ago looking at Microsoft, and they've got these research centers all around the world. And so projects move around the world with daylight. And what they found was that the crappy jobs were just going round and round and round the world. Because they were just being passed on because you didn't know the person. And there's no way that face to face you'd go one day, oh, you go, Daniel, I don't want to do this. Can you do this? And then tomorrow I go, you know what, Daniel, this came back to me, but can you do it? And we just keep you'd never do it face to face.
No, 100%.
But you can do it when you've got this isolation. So I think there's a lot there, and we're learning a lot. And then Oxford at the time, we were learning a lot about how using the technology in some of these ways changes the way that people think.
What's your advice to leaders who are, obviously this is a business podcast after all. So what's your advice to leaders who are grappling with a world in which technology, there's the introduction of AI now, there's everything else that comes with it, grappling with technology and actually just building a culture of learning, of connection, of whatever it might be. And how do you...
So I think there's a couple of things. Clearly one is actively working on kind of people's dispositions, on the people stuff, on the making sure that being intentional about people connecting together, exactly as you were saying about how we get people together, how people are using technology, how people are isolated when they use technology. So I think the communication technology is one side of it. Having conventions, getting people to think, to do the metacognitive stuff, to think about how they're thinking. So when is it good to work from home and have that isolation, and when is it not? What are the choices that you're making? In my business, in my endeavor, what choices am I making as the chief executive, as an executive and manager? But what choices are you making as an individual working within the business as well? So thinking about those choices, getting people to be explicit about the choices that they're making, because I think we're falling into it's Friday, it's my working from home day, rather than flexible working about when it's appropriate to be in the office and when it's not. So I think that's one side of it. I think the other side of it is, I think one of the things that there's a piece of work from MIT that, again, I think is really important, showing that when businesses have digitized, the ones who have got the most value out of that have introduced technologies that can do multiple things, that are adaptable. It's not a technology that can do one thing. It's technologies that can do multiple things and that your staff can adapt and innovate.
Such as?
So if you think about, AI actually now is the ultimate of that. Because you can take large language models. It's not that hard to train them on your business in a whole host of different ways. Maybe we'll talk some more about that. But this MIT research showed that you only realize that value when you develop your people. And so in the same way that the technology can be used to do one thing, you might train your people to use technology in one way. So now you're using the technology that can do one thing, and your people are doing that one thing. If you've got technology that's adaptable, and you train your people to use it in one way, and insist you only use it in that one way, you're not getting the value, adaptability, because you're just using it for the same old. What they found was that it makes the biggest difference when your people are improvisational, that people are trying stuff out, that they're able to kind of think about how they're going to use this technology in different ways. And they've got the skills and the freedom and a bit of space to be able to do that. That there is a bit of flexibility in the way that they use that technology. And when you do that, what you find is that they use this technology in the ways that the designers of the technology never imagined. And that's when businesses get the most value, when the technology is adaptable and the people are improvisational, because you can innovate, you can make it work for your business rather than the kind of standard, straight off the shelf approach. So I think there's something there about, again, the conventions of how we use technology in communication, but the conventions of how we use technology to drive our work as well and realize value in our businesses.
I love that. We do a lot in the world of change, as you would appreciate. And one thing that a lot of companies learn through our programs and our teachings and methodologies is that empowerment, there's a lot of leaders in the world that think that they're empowering their people, right? And they're saying, you're empowered, go and do. but they're not creating the conditions for success. They're not removing the 16 signatures that it takes to get things over the line. They're not removing the bollards that are in the way to allow their teams to flourish. And it's essentially what you're saying here. Actually, the most successful businesses are those ones who are creating the environment and the ecosystem in which people can flourish. What is your, I guess, methodology, philosophy on this? How and I know you've done a lot of work on your own leadership. How do you view leadership in this space about creating and true empowerment, creating those conditions for success and leading people through these changes or innovations or whatever they might be?
Yeah. Look, so what we've done in the Department for Education is, so we have a strategy, and the strategy isn't about a bunch of initiatives that we're doing. The strategy is about a set of choices that we've made as a department. So that's the first thing in terms of creating the environment.
Yeah.
A set of choices, not a bunch of initiatives. Initiatives are planning. They're not. It's not strategy for me. It's planning. And then what you do is.
So when you what's a choice? Like what do you mean by that?
So if you think that, one of the ways I can talk to around the department is, we can do anything. I mean, we're the government. We can change the law.
Yeah.
We can do anything.
Within reason.
Yeah, right. We can do anything, but we can't do everything.
Yeah.
So we can't do everything. So we have to make some choices. And what sometimes happens is that those choices, especially for government departments, perhaps, go quickly into initiatives.
Yeah.
So we almost miss out the strategy bit, and we go, okay, so we're going to do these things. We want to improve kids' literacy. We want to improve the outcomes for Aboriginal kids. We want to do these things. So we'll have an initiative, and we do an initiative, and we do things. And the worst case scenario is that we then congratulate ourselves for doing the initiative rather than from actually making the impact that we wanted.
Yeah.
So,
because the impact normally comes from a longer term, as opposed to
and then you might do a thing, but of course you got to then look at the system, how it's responded, learn about what the next step might be, rather than go, well, we did this thing, so job done. Yeah,
correct.
So if you think more about strategy, and I certainly do think about, I really use quite a bit the play to win framework.
Love play to win.
So let's be clear on our purpose. I'm not rushing to targets. I'm not rushing to initiatives. Let's be clear on our purpose, what we're here for. And so for education, public education, of course, we're here for every student. It doesn't matter who they are. The same promise to every kid when they walk through the door of public education. But we've been clear that our job is to make sure that kids can learn and achieve, not just achieve. It's not just about the results.
Yeah.
It's an indicator.
Yeah.
But so they want them to achieve, but they've got to be good learners as well.
Correct.
So they can learn and achieve, and they can thrive, and they can prosper. So they're thriving right now, they're prospering right now in their lives, and we're setting them up for that transition. So we've got more words around that, but essentially that's it in a nutshell. That's a choice. You could choose something else, right? You could choose achievement, and lots of systems around the world do, whether it be the standardized tests, the year 12 grades, international comparisons that go on, that they say, well, that's what we want to achieve. There's a danger in that. Well, maybe there's not. If that's what you want to achieve, set your system up to achieve that. I don't think that's what parents expect, and I don't think that's the promise that we should be making to kids when they enter public education. The promise has to be much more than you're going to be good at school tests. That's part of it, but it's more. But it's got to be more than that. So we're making a choice, and we're choosing to do that. That broader notion. And then you're going to say, if you play to win it, you're going to say, well, okay, so what's the field in which we're operating? Now, for us, we're public education. It's everywhere. It's not a geographical field. You're going to say, well, what are you going to focus on? And so we make some choices as a system. And so just very quickly, our example is, we said, well, there's 4 areas. One of the areas is equity and excellence. And that's one notion, because we connect those two things together. Yeah. Happy to unpack some of these. I mean, I could talk about these all day, but just let me talk about the choices that we made. So that well-being. We know that well-being, student well-being, a sense of belonging, a sense of connectedness to an adult, makes a massive difference to students' experience at school. It improves their learning and it improves their achievement. So these things are connected together. As well as, we want that. If our kids are not feeling well-being, there's something going on.
Correct. If they don't feel they belong to it.
And so there's something we should be doing there anyway, but we know it as well-being, student agency, students feeling like school's not done to them, but they're part of the story, and being an effective learner. So saying it's our job to make sure that kids are curious, are resilient, can stop and think.
Yeah, 100%.
So, and then what we did was we weighted we said to the system, okay, so what's your response to this? And got some amazing starting points back. So just very quickly, one principal dropped me a line and said, we asked every kid in the school, primary school, from reception through to year 6, we asked every kid in school to write to next year's teacher and tell them what they were thinking about, what they were hoping for, what they were worried about, how they see themselves as learners. And said it was profound.
What amazing.
Right? The impact that they had on the staff.
Yeah.
You know, they showed me pictures of these letters are stuck up all over the wall. And what they did was they colour-coded them against these 4 choices in these 4 areas of impact.
Yeah.
So the school's saying, within the choices that we'd made as a system, what our kids are telling us is this stuff. Of course, they've got the educators' expertise as well. And they're thinking about some of the research that's out there. And then they're drawing these threads through the choices that the system had made to make good choices for the school. And of course, then we can respond and say, okay, so the initiatives, the resources, the support that we might need to put in place might look like this, this, and this. Right? That, for me, is strategy, good choices, understanding how it interacts with your system, and then thinking about the capabilities that you're going to need to develop within your system to respond to that, activating people rather than this perhaps rush to doing initiatives, regardless of what's going on in different contexts.
Yeah, initiatives for initiatives' sake.
Yeah, so we talk about...
It sounds like everyone here in this instance has stopped and thought about it, right?
And you know, I've got to say, when we started, lots of people were like, yeah, but what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
What's the thing? What's the action? You know? And I held off. And I got quite a bit of pushback at first, but it's definitely shifted over time. So we got initial pushback. What do you want me to do? A bit of uncertainty. And then, exactly as you say, I felt like people's first thinking flowed over them, and they started to do the second thinking. They started to do that stop and think. And so then, exactly as you were saying before, which is actually a question about, you know, how do you get people to trust that this is real? How do you get people to change? How do you get this shift going? Of course, what I'm trying to do is do it from the top. Say, well, we're going to be tight on these things. We talk about being tight and flexible. We're going to be tight on these things. But you know your context really well. And there's quite a lot of diversity in our system.
Yeah.
Let's take the knowledge of your part of the system and allow you to, from within this tightness about what we're going for as a whole system, be flexible on where the focus is for your site, because depending on what your site looks like, your kids, your context, you're going to have to do this thing in a different way.
Yeah, 100%. One thing that's popping in my brain here is that this is both complex and complicated. It is difficult. If you have the ability to think slow, you know, to quote Daniel Kahneman in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, if you have the ability to think slow down, make right choices, not always be concerned about the one thing that you're doing, that's one thing. But I guess your ability to think of a system and its complexities and its complications, it's something that we work a lot with our clients. We use a systems thinking approach, to really break down change in a way that makes sense, right? Because that's where majority of the issues fall, is that people aren't able to make sense of the change because it's not been broken down into a system. And we have our own methodologies and frameworks around that. But I'm interested in your thought process around your advice to those or to leaders in this space who, and how can you make these complex concepts more accessible to them?
I think there's something about, you know, when we think about where decisions get made within an organisation and where the complexity is dealt with. So for me, if as a system we do lots of things, you know, lots of initiatives, the service delivery occurs in the school. And so what we do is we do all these initiatives and they all funnel down onto the principal of each site. We're asking them to deal with the complexity and the integration of all these bits and pieces, including their kids and the complexity of kids and families and whatever their particular context is. That's crazy. We shouldn't be asking a principal to do that. There is a level of complexity at that, you know, at the service delivery point, you know, where we are in a school, if you think about it that way. But actually, I think the system could be doing a lot more to deal with some of that complexity. Now, the problem is that you can try and do that as a system, and then you oversimplify it. You know, so you say, well, if we provide clarity, we can just get everybody doing the same thing. Yeah. And that might work in some situations. You know, so if you think about something like Subway, McDonald's, you know, one of the great things about what they do is that there's a standard, and it's standardized, and you meet the standard. It doesn't matter where you go in the world. You know, if you're going to walk into a Subway or a McDonald's, you know pretty much what kind of product you're going to get, right?
Correct.
The standardization really works. But for something like public education, which is much more of a diverse, distributed, complex system, you can't do that. So what we're so the way in which we're going about it, as I say, is to talk about the choices that the system's made, and then be clear about what some of the choices that are available, perhaps at the next layer down, the region, then the choices that are available at a site. Because this field of choices that we've made as a system, you can't expect a school to do all of that. Again, they can do anything with these boundaries that are created, but they can't do everything. So it's supporting them to make choices, and them really feeling like not only are they able to make choices and they've got that permission, that if it doesn't go well, that's okay too. So we'll talk a little bit about productive failure.
Yep.
You know, that trying something out, keeping an eye, not keep doing it even though you know it's not working, but try something out. If it's not working, stopping, going back, taking a different track. That's not going to be seen as a failure. That's going to be seen as a way of
evolution,
a good way forward. Exactly that. One of the kind of challenges that we've got is people will talk in education about best practice, and that kind of always stuns me because people say, "Oh, this is best practice," and that assumes that it's a simple system and that you know what to do.
Yeah,
you know. So when you know what to sharpen a pencil, you sharpen a pencil. There's a one or two ways of doing it. If you try and innovate and find a new way of sharpening a pencil, you're probably going to stuff it up.
Yeah,
you know. So for a simple thing that's well established, just do the thing.
Yeah, correct.
And so so for things like the early years in an education context, the early years of developing reading and numeracy, you're going to do a lot of direct instruction. You're going to do a lot of practice and repetition. You're going to help kids to understand the relationship between sounds and letters and groups of letters. You're going to help kids start to understand the relationship between those groups of letters and words. And you know what I mean? And there's a lot of practice there. There's a lot of doing it. There's a lot of instruction.
Pattern recognition.
Yeah, right. So there's a lot of instruction in there. But then what we find is that particularly our 15-year-old boys in Australia, their reading ability is really sensitive to their level of empathy, their ability to see things from somebody else's perspective. That's not a thing you direct instruct.
No.
It's not a best practice.
No.
There's a principle there about boys' level of empathy that you might incorporate into your actions. But we're not doing a lesson on empathy.
No.
We're not doing a lesson on seeing things from other people's perspectives. It's something that you would build into your practice.
Yeah.
So it's not best practice because now it's getting complicated. So it's good practice. There were some established ways. We're going to take those, going to respond to context. But actually what teachers do most of all is emergent practice, because they know all these things, they've got their expertise, they've got some resources. But what happens is kids turn up on a particular day, something's happened in the yard at recess, it's windy outside. What they're actually doing is they're responding to the moment. And so I would say that's not complicated, that's complex now. That's got this level of complexity, and it's true in our system with the diversity of the situations in which schools and preschools operate. The complexity is so high that you really are looking for emergent practice, and you're asking your people to make decisions in the moment. Now, that's not making it up as you go along. That's making sure that they're positioned really well, that they've got the skills, but you have to give them space to make those decisions in the moment. They have to feel like they're able to operate within ambiguity. They have to feel like they've got what they need to be able to amplify things that are really working and positive in this moment, because you could do the same thing tomorrow and it might not work so well. That they can amplify those things that are working right now, or that they've got the skills and the resources and what they need to be able to dampen down when that approach to the complexity, probing the system, seeing what happens, and dampen down when it's not working or they're not getting the outcomes that they're looking for.
You had an example that you shared with me in one of our chats around the Lego model to explain the complex systems versus complicated. Can you share that with us?
Yeah. So it's just a way again of getting people to think about that and how they think about it, but how they feel about it as well. So what we do in that workshop is give people some instructions about building a Lego thing. So, I think the first thing we do is, a tower with alternating colours.
Yeah.
No, actually the first thing we do is we say to them, here's a pile of Lego. So the simple thing, the best practice thing. Here's a pile of Lego. Separate it out into colours, blocks of the same colours, piles of blocks of the same colours, and the special things, wheels, windows, people, that stuff. What you find is nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
They don't need any planning time. They don't talk about it. They just get on with it.
Just going, yeah.
Everybody knows what to do. It's kind of obvious. It's established in people's heads.
Yeah.
Best practice. And if you try and do it another way, if you try to plan some way, it's just be convoluted, just be overcomplicating it. There's no need. Just get on with it. Just do it.
Yeah.
Then what we do is we say, well, here's some instructions, and it might be this, build a thing with alternating colours, build a tree or an animal, off you go. And what people do is they start talking. There's some decision to make. We're going to build a tree. We're going to build an animal. What are the pieces that we got? They don't do it for very long, but they just have a quick conversation, resolve a couple of questions that is apparent to everyone. We know how to build Lego, and then they get on with it and they build a thing, and they're usually successful. Then we start to get to the complicated, and in the complicated, what we do is we might do something like say, is instructions, and you can't talk. Right, so they want to build these things, some choices to make, and they can't talk. So they start developing a language without talking. Start looking at each other, nudging each other, and then what we'll do is we might say, and we're gonna change a team member. I'll tap a team member on the shoulder, and they have to change groups. And you just, you might just do one while they're trying to build this thing. So they've got to induct the new person in. So it's quite complicated. There's quite a lot of things going on. Yeah. And for each one, they've got to find a way to do it. But people know how they're going to approach it. You tell them they can't talk, so they develop a kind of sign language between each other, lots of facial expressions. Yeah. And it's starting to feel like there's a lot going on now to try and build this thing. And then the last one is the complex. And in the complex, we just kind of put in, just more difficulty, to more choices. We're tapping people on the shoulder a bit more, so they're moving from one group to another. The teams are changing. It's quite complex now, and people are starting to feel it. And when you talk to them afterwards, they said it was really good to have the time at the beginning so we could talk about what we were going to do, and then you stopped us from talking. That was quite hard. But when the team members started going and we got new people, it was kind of like, I can't be bothered with the new person. So it was just us getting on with the task. And then you can go even further, actually, and push them into chaos, where you're just changing the people all the time. So people coming and going. Yeah. Nobody's got ownership of this thing anymore. It's the thing that you're asking them to do is really complex, but you're not really giving them all the tools to be able to do the thing. And what you find is, at the end of that, people will just say, I just disengaged. Yeah. I just didn't care. Yeah. It was so overwhelming. We could have done it, and actually, if you just left me to do it, I could have done something. But trying to do it as a team, it was just too messy. And so what you start to see is people get this. Now you get this kind of shorthand within the team about, well, this task is a simple task. We should just do it. This task is a complex task. We're going to have to, and they knew what they needed for a complex task because we pointed it out. Or this is feeling like chaos. Nobody's got hold of this. Nobody's got ownership. We don't know what we're doing. It's just like when we did the Lego task, And now so what's really interesting about it is it develops these language with people. Correct. Again, to be kind of to understand what kind of situation they're operating in and what might be needed. And once you get going on that, what I find is that people start to reflect on what they were doing before, when they were applying simple to complicated, or they were applying, good practice to a really complex system where it wasn't really going to work out. It'd get you through, but it wasn't really going to work out. And sometimes, when you've got a complex system, the other way of doing it is to kind of be a dictator and try and squish down all the complexity, not honor the complexity or deal with it. Try and squish down the complexity and just deal with the bit that you want to deal with. Because you know that as soon as you stop doing the squishing and you let the complexity flow back into the real world, your project, your intervention, the thing you've developed just doesn't work. Yeah.
I love that example because it just speaks true to the work that we do actually, because the amount of businesses that we see that are in that chaos phase, right? And I mean, anyone listening in who's gone through a big, large, complex change within or complicated change within their business where things just haven't been clearly identified and structured from the word go. They haven't been enabled. We haven't created the right conditions for success. Again, going back to that term. Then they end up in chaos. And this is where you see turnover increase, where people just opt out. They go, this is too hard. I don't want to go through another this type of change. engagement levels drop. People just go, this is crap. I don't want to continue on with this anymore. Then what happens is, to fix the problem, because they find themselves too far into it, they start spending more. Shit, we need to throw more money at this because we're too far, we're too deep into it now. Let's keep, and you just see this whirlwind continually, and this these companies potentially spiral out of control due to this one change that wasn't set up for success, right? And I guess that's where we really play in that world of, how do we set it up from the word go? How do we enable this change? What do you do in that space whenever embarking on a new change? How do you ensure that it is set up for success, and how do you ensure that people have the right conditions to be successful when delivering on it?
So I think, obviously, the first thing is to listen to people, is to put out the kind of, even in our whole strategy that we did for the department, the first thing we did was we went and talked to kids, which sounds wild, but it's really not. They're almost our customers, right?
Pretty groundbreaking stuff. Just have a conversation.
In the same way that principle did that I talked about. So what helps you to understand is, I think, what some of the drivers are, what some of the things that people will latch onto, some of the things that they're not prepared for, and that's okay, because but it means that we need to be sure that we put that preparation in place. And the diversity across the system. So if you think about, some of our high SES, high performing schools working really well in Metro, to some of the schools that are working really well but in a different way and in challenging contexts in the APY lands, we've got a lot going on. So going to talk to the kids in all of those environments and making sure that we've got an understanding and we're really listening. I think that's really important kind of groundwork to do. And then as we start to move into the work, to make this notion of it being purpose driven aligns with people's drivers. So we talk about bringing joy to the work. So make sure that we're kind of framing it like that. In these guiding principles that we talk about that's trying to be explicit about things like being tight and flexible. So tight on these choices, but flexible on how they're met. So people understand what the framing of this is. We talk about being a learning system. So we're learning. This is us as a system trying to learn, not imposing this thing, and that we are ready to listen and change depending on how the thing goes. That takes ages to bed in, right? So certainly in some of the change that I'm trying to drive, people just don't trust it. They don't believe that you really mean it, right? And you can only get them to do it when you demonstrate that you are learning and that you're open to that, and nobody's going to shout when something does go wrong.
Because they've got their own mental models of the way poor change has been done, and they're bringing them to every single change, which adds to that complexity again.
So you're almost kind of for me, I think about it as kind of building the reputation of the organisation with our own staff. You have to. You're building that reputation, and as with all reputations, it takes ages to build and a moment to knock down.
Correct.
So you're kind of aware of that as well as we're doing this. So we got these guiding principles that we're explicit about what we're expecting from our people, but what our people can expect of each other and can expect of we're all the system, but we need a better word. But the system, the choices that are made more centrally. So I think there's some of those things that go on, and that learning system as well is also about those letters at that primary school that I talked about, Charlie Gardens Primary School. It was showing those back to the system as well, showing how this could be done. Because lots of things for people, you can almost only imagine the thing. The kind of your adjacent possible, the things that are just, you've done all these things before and you can imagine what the next little step might be. But when you see what somebody else has done, I can make that, I won't do exactly that, but I can make that work in my context.
Correct.
And so looping some of those things back into the system in different parts of the system. So even kind of, for me, what's going on in one part of the business, early childhood, has got a really big impact on what's going on in senior secondary, But we don't always see that if we see them as separate parts of the business to be delivered. So just connecting some of those stories across.
That's the perspective building, isn't it? Yeah. Really. I mean, you mentioned the word mentor earlier, where you had one of those mentors who really shaped who you were. Mentors give you different perspective. They give you perspective on what can be achieved based on what they've done as well, right? And we often we have a framework. So everything you've said there is music to my ears, because we have a framework which is quite simple in the fact that it's, boundaries. What are we doing and what are we not doing? Let's keep it simple. Context, again, purpose, like you said. How does this connect back into the purpose, the strategy? What does this mean for community, customer, our people, all the above? How does this then interact within the ecosystem that we're working in? And then what are those different perspectives that we want to hear? And sometimes, like we said, mental models, people bring some negative perspectives, but there are also people who bring in some really positive perspectives of what they've seen done before, which shines a new light. Hang on, we could make this work. So that's really important and foundational to setting up any piece of work, any project.
And I think, if you take this notion of kind of planning versus strategy, if you're planning and you're focused on your initiatives and you've got people who are, not working with you, it feels like they're trying to undermine the initiative. They're stopping you getting on with the initiatives. If you see it as a set of choices, when you hear people, who might have some disconfirming feedback or want to do things a different way, it helps you to kind of stop and think about what's actually going on there, in the ecosystem, as you say. Yeah. What's going on? What were their experiences? What would need to be true? And I say this, and my staff would laugh about me saying this because it was the thing I say all the time. What would have to be true in order for us to achieve the things we're trying to achieve? So what would have to be true for this group of people who are thinking in this particular way to find themselves in the story? How can we help them connect in? You approach them and see them in a different way when you're trying to really drive a strategy than perhaps trying to drive a bunch of initiatives and they're not complying with the initiative. It's a completely different way of thinking. It drives completely different
I love
way
that.
of thinking.
Your background is science of learning, neuroscience of learning, like all the above, right? So you come from a different perspective altogether regarding any change. I come from a different perspective, just having worked with a team that's researched this stuff and we put it out to the world. So I come again with a similar perspective to you that change needs to be done in a certain way. Obviously, the simple model doesn't fit into the complex, so we need to the emerging stuff, as you mentioned earlier. There are many leaders, and you would have seen them through and throughout your career, who don't come to the party with this perspective. They don't come to the change or the transformation they're trying to embark on with this perspective. They come from a way of telling people to do change and expect it to be done, those initiatives, so to speak. What's your advice to those leaders around how they might be able to improve their way of leading through change?
Yeah. I think this is one of the toughest parts of the story, I think, because, you ask the question about what would they do, but sometimes they've been so used to a way of working that it's who they are, and asking somebody to do something different, do something that's contrary to who they are and who they become used to being.
What got them to their role in the first place? Yeah.
And often kind of gives them status within the organisation. That's hard.
It is.
Right? That's one of the really hardest things. So I think sometimes, so clearly one of the things is changing the definition of success. And that being about kind of the success around the way of working rather than just achieving the initiatives. Because people can achieve things, but bulldoze through, and there's kind of debris behind them, and broken relationships, and all kinds of things behind them, and that's not what we want. So I think in terms of that change, I think there is something about, as I say, changing the definitions of success. So being clear, that's one of the reasons why we've been so clear about these guiding principles. There's an expectation of a way of working, and one of our guiding principles is this notion of trust and verify. Start with the notion that you can trust your people, and yet you've got to verify that it's working and that trust is worthwhile. But especially in public service where you're spending taxpayers' money, I think we'll often talk about how that single mum is working 2 jobs in order to pay for food and clothes and her taxes, and those are the dollars that we're spending. So you have to have those control mechanisms, the verification mechanisms in place. Of course you do, but start with the notion that you can trust your people, and then think about what capabilities they might need to be able to really take that trust and work with it. And I would say the last little bit I would say in terms of this change is, if you think about me as being chief executive of an organisation, change doesn't happen because I say so. Right? I'm not the person that influences people. I mean, I'll say something and people respond to it,
Yeah.
and that's how the thing works. But if I think about teachers, who influences teachers? It's other teachers and it's kids. It's not me. And even in high schools, like who influences history teachers? It's not maths teachers. It's other history teachers.
Yeah,
It's the ecosystem.
absolutely.
It's knowing where the real influences, the influences that will be sustained and will self-sustain within your system, and activating those. Yeah. So it doesn't matter what level within the organisation, you've got to find those influences, and often they are peer influences. So activating your champions within those peer groups, activating that modelling, feeding that modelling back through, recognising and rewarding that kind of behaviour, the behaviours that you're looking for, and then feeding that back through. I think that's how you get real sustained change.
Yeah, absolutely. You said something earlier in the conversation. I can't remember. I'm actually kicking myself for not being able to remember. We said, but now you know this. We should know this.
Oh yeah.
What was the?
That was about how kids stop and think skills make such a big difference to their life outcomes.
So now they know this. Now we know this as parents. Yeah. We should be teaching them about stopping and thinking, right? And so to the CEO or to the leaders that are listening in, now that they know this about change, right? Now that they know this about it is about how can we now move forward and actually lead through change in a way that is going to have the greatest positive impact for our people and our community and customer. I'll add further to the weight of having the knowledge, because if you're a CEO, I think this is knowledge that you should absolutely know. There was a recent study done on, they interviewed 1,087 board members of large, like ASX listed type companies, where they had just fired the CEO.
Oh, yeah.
Right, so very, very specific study.
You're making me nervous, but
I think you'll be fine. And so they just fired the CEO, and they went and asked him. So they ran down there and they said, "Why did you fire the CEO?" And 31% of the answers, the number one answer, 31% was we fired them because of the mismanagement of change. 31%.
Yeah.
The number two reason was 29%, which was inaction. Which is effectively the same thing as mismanagement of change, right? Like it is just doing nothing. It's putting your head in the ground and hoping that these things go away. And so with that knowledge of 60% of the reasons in which why you're not valuable in your job is because you are unable to manage change correctly. That knowledge now, like this is something that all leaders should be thinking about. How do we build the maturity of our organization to be able to lead through change that is valuable, so people feel inspired, they feel fulfilled? And I think it's critical that we have to start to change the narrative and reframe the way people think about it.
Yeah. Look, I think the one thing I'd come back to would be this, and certainly my experience in looking at public systems, government systems around the world, is this shift from planning to strategy. We invest so much in those kind of the initiatives and the work and the workflows, and of course you have to, because that's how you get stuff done.
Yeah.
Right. But if you're not getting stuff done within these set of choices, and those choices are not clear to your people, it's really hard, because you're just asking them to do another thing without them understanding, not just understanding the why. You can we're doing this thing to achieve this, to create this product, to improve this service, to do this. That's not it. It's because we've made these choices as an organisation. This is who we are as an organisation. And that you've got that shared, I think you do have to come from that shared sense of purpose and shared sense of understanding of the choices that have been made, including, as I say, we've talked about these as being guiding principles, what the conventions and expectations are, which then flows through into even things like the working from home that we were talking about. How do my as somebody working in this organisation, how am I meeting these expectations in the way in which I'm working from home and making some choices about the use of technology?
Yeah. Well, I am conscious of time, and we are flying through this podcast, but I do want to talk more about the education system as a whole. I know that you are doing some amazing things. We do a little bit of work with you guys at the department. So I know you guys are doing some amazing things. Lots of changes happening in your space. But you said something to me the other day, and I know that you talked recently at the Google
Leaders Forum.
Google's Leaders Forum.
Yeah.
And you're saying that South Australia is potentially attracting global attention in what we're doing here. Can you explain what we are doing and what your vision for South Australian education is?
So, look, I think, when you look across Australia and around the world, things like our NAPLAN results, we've spent billions of dollars trying to improve our NAPLAN results. And really, nationally, we've not been going anywhere for the past 10, 15
Went
years.
backwards this week,
yeah. Well, let's not.
Yeah, slightly.
I think the story is that, so we get this noise, this up and down each year, but overall, over a long period of time, the trend is flat. On most of our measures. Yeah. And in fact, on some of the international measures, there's pros and cons of them. Australia's performance is dropping. So we can't keep doing what we're doing. We have to think about this in a different way. What's interesting about, so if I think about some of what makes a difference? Of course, quality teaching makes a massive difference. And we've got quality teaching across South Australia in our public education system, Catholic, independent. And what's one very clear from the research is that we've got as high quality teaching in each one of those sectors. What we've also see, which I think we've not nationally or internationally put into our thinking, is this notion that if you look at some of the data around our international comparisons of 15-year-olds, it shows us our maths performance, our reading performance, and our science performance. But what that research also shows us is what impact curiosity has on those things. So 2022, the data's just come out. 2022, our maths performance, students' sense of belonging. So students answer questions that gives an indication of their sense of belonging at school. The kids who had the high sense of belonging, if they were a country on their own, they'd be smashing Australia. Yeah, wow. Yeah? Students having a positive relationship with an adult. The students who are in that top group, that push them into the top 10 in the world in maths performance because they've got a positive relationship with an adult. Yeah,
so it's the ecosystem.
Curiosity, massive impact. Well-being, big impact. Perseverance, big impact. So what we've just seen this data, but actually we've seen this data before in previous years. And what we said is, well, these are things that make a big difference to the student's achievement. But actually, this is what industry's asking us for. They want kids who are literate and numerate, but also what we hear is kids with persistence, with resilience, with curiosity. There's a win-win to be had here if we really focused on developing these things in our kids, alongside the quality teaching that they need. That's how we'll change the system. That's how we'll change kids' lives. That's how we'll change achievement. That's how we'll help kids to prosper, because they'll go from school, whether they're going to go and work for Macca's, whether they're going to be an entrepreneur, whether they're going, whatever their future learning and employment looks like, it's going to be some of these characteristics. So we're not moving away from instruction and quality instruction and literacy and numeracy and the subjects, but what we are saying is that's not sufficient. So working across Australia, say, with those 4 areas of impact: excellence and equity, well-being, students being effective learners, and students' agency, their sense of having some control over their learning, because they're really going to need that in an AI world and in their future. And those things work together, and those things work to improve achievement. Those are the decision set that we've made for South Australian public education, and it looks really different to other systems around the world, which is strange, because for me it really seems like a no-brainer. Yeah,
you know what you know.
Yeah, right.
I mean, the education system has often been compared to the Henry Ford model, where everyone is judged by a standard measure. Clock in, recess, lunch, and clock out. But what it does is it potentially overlooks the unique abilities of everyone. And there's the old Einstein quote, which is, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, what's attributed to Einstein, judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it'll live its life forever live its life feeling it's stupid. Do you think that the system is still, like everywhere else, is still judging fish? Like, is that what we're doing? Where this grading system of, I'll give you an example. My nephew is by far and away one of the most intelligent kids I've ever met when it comes to animals, flora, fauna, right? Like he is just on a different world. And I've said to my sister many a time, this kid could change the world. And I sometimes think the education system is holding him back. Yeah. It's building in bad habits. It's not offering him the opportunity. It's not creating him the conditions for him and the opportunity to continue to flourish in that area, because there's these other areas that he needs to learn as well. Is it broken somewhat? I don't know. Is it just me that thinks that way?
Yeah. It needs to move on, right? And of course, when you're charting a course for a state like South Australia within a federated nation, you've also got to be a bit careful, right? We've got the Australian curriculum. We're not chucking that out.
Yeah.
Well, our kids have to have a similar experience, same experience in some ways as other students in other states, right? Because we can't go too wild.
Yeah.
So we do have some boundaries. But exactly as you say, this notion of equity and excellence isn't just about making sure that all kids are good at passing the standardized tests and getting an ATAR. The equity piece is actually about making sure that kids are being successful in the way that they want to and is going to make a difference in their lives, right?
Absolutely.
And that's not, and again, if we come back to literacy and numeracy, that's not to say anything goes. We're tight on literacy and numeracy, we're tight on, there are some things, part of the promise to kids when they enter school is you're going to learn some stuff.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to understand some science, you're going to understand some history and literature as well as your literacy, because these things are going to open doors for everyone. And some people are going to need to be able to build on those with specific expertise to become, you know, who they want to be and to contribute to the economy and prosper and all of those things. So it's got to be broader. It's got to be a broader offering. And there are some things working against us, right? So your point about the kind of the standardization and the narrowing. I do think the ATAR works against kids in so many ways. Even our highest performing kids, the pressure on them to achieve the ATAR rather than to be good at what they're great at.
Yeah.
You know, if a kid's great at dancing.
Yep.
Because of the way that scaling works, because of the way that the ATAR is calculated, they might not get a high ATAR, but they're an amazing dancer.
Yeah.
And then they get this message from the system as, oh, you're all right.
Yeah.
When they're actually amazing.
Yeah, correct.
You know?
Yeah.
So we want our kids to find their ways of being amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the ATAR doesn't do it. And yet it creates this competition. It creates this sense for kids about what they should be doing. And kids who want to go on to other pathways, vocational pathways and other pathways, they get given an ATAR, even if they don't want to go to university. And the message that it sends them, oh, you got a low ATAR. Well, I wasn't going for that. I was going for something else.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
And it just teaches the very basic way of learning of I need to learn this to get this score, as opposed to we want to create thinkers.
Yeah,
we want to create a world of curiosity, and this system somewhat doesn't allow us to do that, in my opinion.
Yeah. So that's right. So that's the kind of the driver that it creates in the system, isn't it? The score is the purpose. So what's my path of least resistance from here to a good score?
To get the good score.
Yeah.
Because the good score gets me into the good university degree, which gets me into the good job, which...
Yeah. But actually, you know, when I was working at Oxford, we used to interview all the students that applied, and they'd get everyone to get at least one interview, if not two. It's a big deal for the university to invest all this time. And all these students were predicted really high grades, 3 A's at A level.
Yeah.
And we'd ask them a question in the interview, and every single kid I ever met said, I don't know, we haven't done that at school. And then we'd say, we know, that's why we're asking you, what do you think? And half of them would say, no, you don't understand. We didn't do that at school. And the other half say, oh, I don't know. Is it this?
Yeah.
Oh, what about this? And we'd say, no, here's a bit of more information. What do you think? Oh, in that case.
Yeah.
And those are the kids who get in.
Yeah.
So they're all getting the same score, but these are completely different kids. And what we were doing, not as an employer, but as a university, we're trying to differentiate the kids who could actually think from the kids who could get a good score. Our system can't be designed and driven for kids to get good school scores. The good school scores should be an indicator that we've partially completed our promise, met our promise that we made to kids when they entered the system, that we were going to develop them in terms of their skills, their knowledge, the capabilities, the dispositions, you know, these characteristics that they were going to have resilience and creativity that they were going to take into the world.
Yeah.
We're not getting that from those standard scores. The scores are still important, but they're not everything.
I agree. I think back a lot at my time at school, my ATAR was low and like it was under 70 low. And I honestly think that if I'd gotten into the university degree, I applied for one thing. I'm like, this is a low score. It was 73 or whatever. I'll get in. That's piece of piss, whatever. And I got I didn't get in. And I honestly think that if I did, that I'd actually be in a different world right now. And because growing up, I've always had this sort of entrepreneurial flair. I used to go around to everyone asking for 10 cents. No one wanted the jingly janglies in their pocket. So I would say, all right, I would take advantage of it. I would ask everyone for 10 or 20 cents. They would give it to me. By the end of the week, I'd have $5-10. I'd go buy some Redskins or something like, remember the lollies and Milky Bars or whatever they're called? And I'd sell it back to them from the money that they gave me. And I would I'd be in front. And then even like when I was playing in my cricket days, my mum would teach me taught me how to cook, clean, wash up, wash clothes, everything like that. And everyone knew that I knew how to do it. And I'd go away and like the cricket carnivals. And I would charge people to cook them dinner. I would charge people to wash their stuff. And I was like, there you go, $5. Do you want to plate of pasta? No worries, $5. There you go. But I reckon if I'd gone through this system, I wouldn't have found my way and path of just trying to figure it out, right? And so I guess whilst I say the education system that needs improvement and it's offered some people some amazing careers like yourself and thinkers of the world, it's not the be-all and end-all if you don't, right? There is other opportunities, but it comes back to that resilience. It comes back to the life lessons, the so-called street smarts that people can have. So there's different types of education as well, is I guess what I'm trying to say.
So that's right. And so that's that notion of the kind of equity being broadening the offering, broadening the definition of success, making kids sure that kids can find their success without compromising on some of the really important non-negotiables of education. So getting that right, I think, is our challenge. Because I think the danger is that school, as it was constructed in the past, gets less and less relevant for students, apart from the ones who, the narrow pathway actually works for. So, and then you put AI into the world and kind of all bets are off now, right? Because what is going to lead to success, to flourishing, to prospering for people in work and in life, now it's changing. It's changing pretty quickly, and we've got to make some choices. And I think in South Australia, we're making really good choices. And I think in lots of places in the world, they're not.
Yeah, because you're adapting it, aren't you? You're adopting, I should say, the ChatGPTs of the world and the AIs of the world, aren't you?
Yeah, we're being careful. So, we just put this strategy out. We said we're going to be a learning system. And then ChatGPT came along. Everybody else, so many people around the world, almost everybody around Australia said, we're banning it. Yeah. Kids are going to cheat. It's bad. We're banning it. And we said, no, we're not going to ban it, but we're going to be careful. And what we did was, we were the first jurisdiction in Australia and almost the first in the world to work with Microsoft and ChatGPT to bring into our system a version of it. And so it started just with 8 schools, so probing the system, learning. Started just with 8 schools. Knowing that we were learning, we put in guardrails. So it was the output's filtered for students. It doesn't learn from students. None of the data goes to OpenAI to develop new models. Yeah. It's all contained. So we created this safe space, and then we put it in the hands of teachers and students in the classroom. So when teachers log on and students log on to the public education system, ChatGPT, essentially, our version, we call it EdChat, same technology as behind ChatGPT, is available to them. And we just said, we want to learn from you. We're not going to say what best practice is, because this is emergent practice. It's too complex. Yeah. So we want to learn from you. And that's been absolutely outstanding for us. And it's really helped us, as you say, kind of to lead, but not because we've kind of invested loads and loads in lots and lots of expertise, just because we took a learning stance. Yeah. And my CIO, he gets invited up to speak to people all over the world, to education systems. Oh, what are you doing? Yeah. We're just learning. Yeah. We're just learning. But these are the things that we've learned, and some of those things have been really powerful. And we've got more schools involved now, and we continue to learn. And it's helping us to understand so this is the kind of public, open system that we're using at the moment, but how we could train our own AI to support our teachers and our kids in the learning. It's helping us to understand that now. And again, just because we're taking a learning stance and we've developed expertise, we're going to be able to take some steps forward that I really believe nobody else in the world could.
Yeah, I love that. What's your stance on, like, I use ChatGPT for research, help me rewrite this, help me word this in a way. Like, I use it more as a language model, probably how it was intended. Yeah. My writing, although I've learned English at school and did quite okay in it, whatever, I can definitely pull together a letter, a paragraph, you name it, an email. Kids these days, not so much. And yet, do you think moving into the future that they're going to need to learn how to write? As in, because when you can just explain something and through voice to text, that this model will be then able to translate it in a way that is professional and efficient and clear and concise, as opposed to some rabble that the rest of us might write.
Yeah. A couple of things. I think if you don't know how to write, are you going to know whether that thing's good or not?
Well, that's true.
Right.
Well, you know how to read,
Yeah.
and you read what's good.
Yeah, but you also, so that's true. But you also know what good writing looks like. When you're writing, you can read the thing, but you know that when you're writing, you're speaking to an audience. So when you read the thing, you're thinking about how it's written for this audience, and if it needs to be rewritten. It's not just about taking the information.
That's
out
correct.
Of it, right? So I do think that, but it's not. But what it's doing is some of the low level stuff. And what's really interesting about education is you go through the low level to get to the high level. You know, so we see this in lots of professions. We're going to need the highest level lawyers and doctors, but the AI is going to take out the middle bit, the lower level lawyering and doctoring, you know, and some of those roles. So what does the pathway look like to great expertise? That's a real challenge, I think.
Yeah, that is huge.
With AI and learning. And it's true in writing, it's the same thing. You got to know the basics in order to build through to the expertise, because what people are going to need is that higher level expertise in things like literacy and numeracy.
Correct.
Clearly, you know, so Andreas Schleicher, who's the head of education at the OECD, he was in Adelaide. We invited him to speak to teachers in Adelaide in 2019 about AI. So we were already thinking about it way before, you know, people were thinking about trying to respond and respond to ChatGPT. And one of the things that he says a lot, and it's well worn now, is that if we carry on doing what we're doing in education, we will be developing second-class robots, because the robots will be first-class robots. Correct. We need to think about how we're developing first-class people. Yeah? So people are still going to need them to know things. They're going to still need to have the skills. They're going to need to know how to interact with the technology in a way that they've not done before. And clearly some of these dispositions about resilience and creativity become more important than knowledge, some of the basic knowledge and skills. But we're still going to have to teach our kids the basic knowledge and skills so that they do get this pathway, intentional pathway to high level knowledge and skills. So they know what good writing looks like. And they can do good writing,
absolutely.
But they can interact with the technology, they can assess the technology. Because don't forget, certainly the AI that we've got at the moment is essentially autocorrect or autofill on steroids. Yeah. It's just doing the next best thing that you would say in this sentence in response to this question. So what you're getting is a kind of averaging of the world. Well, that's great, but that's all you're getting. Yeah. You're not doing the next thing. You're not doing the thing that nobody else has thought. And so we're going to need those high level skills for people to be able to do that. And also what the AI finds difficult is contextualization. So dealing with complexity, and it'll give you an average response, but you know it's not so great at understanding your context and responding to it. And of course, what we were saying before, there are so many skills when you're dealing with people and trying to lead people. Even that notion we talked about before, just because people know it doesn't mean they're going to do it.
Correct, 100%.
So, you know, people are going to need to be in that kind of space as well. So the education system has to respond to that and has to get young people ready for that world. So that's why we've introduced things like those dispositions in our strategy, and in fact now in our curriculum for South Australia, for public education for South Australia, to say this is going to need to be more and more part of teachers' jobs, because kids are going to need this. They're going to need the knowledge, yes, but they're going to need these dispositions as well. So we've explicitly put it into what we're expecting to be developed in kids in South Australian public education.
I love it. Now, we well into our time and almost embarking on closing. I just want to ask one last question before we jump into some quick fire questions. If you had a billboard, if you could put your number one thought, fear, idea, opportunity on a billboard around the world, so you had in the major cities all around the world, you could get access to one billboard, what would it say?
You asked me to do simple for a complex, aren't you? That's very good.
I am.
It would be stop and think. I mean, it would have to be that. Yeah. It would just be that reminder in your busy day with the pressures that you're on you, in the rush to do whatever it is that we're doing. You know, that tangible reminder, the billboard, to just take a moment to stop and think, to just wait, to see how, to probe in a complex situation, to probe and see how it responds before you decide what you're going to do. Stop and think. Obviously, there are situations, emergency situations, crisis situations where you just need to act. And good leaders know the difference between those two.
Situational leadership.
Yeah, but often we do the just reacting when stopping and thinking would be important. So, you know, it would be that. It would be, it would be learn, listen and learn. That would be another kind of version that I'd have around the corner.
Yeah.
There's a few of them, but and when I say learn, that be a learner.
Yeah.
Notice the world around you. Give your attention to understand that you want to give your attention to the important things. It's that kind of learning, not kind of know more stuff.
I love that. Maybe that's the be a learner. Yeah. That's one in its own right. All right, beautiful. Let's jump into some quick fire questions as we round off the podcast. What are you reading right now?
Not work related would be Daisy Dunn's The Missing Thread.
Oh, yeah.
It's a retelling of ancient history with the women put back in.
Oh, wow.
Because the women have been written out by various people over time. So this research has gone back and actually it's not so much about the women in ancient history. It's the story of ancient history told properly.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. So what's it called, Daisy?
The author's Daisy Dunn, and it's
Dunn.
called The Missing Thread.
The Missing Thread. I love it. What's one book, self-development book, that you believe that that stands out outside of Playing to Win, which is what you mentioned earlier?
Look, I think one of the things for the modern world and to deal with complexity, and certainly in my system, one of the things that we're kind of grappling with is shifting from quite hierarchical to kind of structure to more of an ecosystem. And you need a structure, some hierarchy to run the business, right? But more as an ecosystem. That means taking a little bit of ego and some things out of leadership. So probably the book or the thinking that I do try and share, and I think it's important, is kind of Brene Brown's work. I think it flows through in systems. People can access it quite readily and almost kind of enact it within their work. So I'm kind of a big fan of that.
Yeah. Brene is amazing. Yeah. My business partner, Michelle, went and spent some time with Brene in the US. Yeah. What's one lesson that's taken you the longest to learn?
The value of political compromise. And I don't mean by kind of big P politics. I mean just kind of little p politics. Yeah. Because I don't like it. Yeah. I don't like it when people don't play with a straight bat and playing the game. Yeah. I feel, I have my emotional response to that, first thing response. But, in the real world, to get on in the world and to work with others and to move forward, you got to do some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
I mean, you play in the world of stopping and thinking, whereas sometimes the political world can be about getting the vote, right?
Yeah. Well, and not the, that big P politics, but just the politics with it between organisations, between government departments, between education sectors, between states and territories, between, there's all of these people that we work with and often have got really different drivers that I would say sometimes I've come across people and I think that their drivers are certainly not in line with my values, and I would say that they're of low integrity. But you got to work with these people. So I find that hard. Yeah. I'm still learning that, I reckon.
I think anyone finds hard working with people with no integrity. If you could have a coffee with one current or historical figure, who would it be?
Oh, that's a tricky one. There's great in history, not so far back in the 80s, great educator in South Australia called Boomer. I'd want to sit down with him. That's kind of South Australian education story, and and kind of similar. Don Dunstan, because not being born in South Australia, I kind of come into this story, and there's these kind of mythical figures in education and in politics. Yeah, but probably the big one, it'd be Barack Obama or somebody like that. If you really could, I mean, that's
why wouldn't you?
Yeah, right. Yeah. That would be amazing.
What's some of the best advice you've ever received?
This came from a PhD supervisor, and it was: don't go for the little challenges, go for the big ones. Do it or don't do it, but go for the big ones. And if you fail, that's all right. Learn from it, move on. He gave that in the context of, researchers in the field that we were working in, just turning the handle, turning out research papers, that's all right. He was saying to me, thinking I was having an academic career, don't do that. But I think in the leadership that I get asked to do in education now, it's the same stuff, right? Don't go for mediocrity, don't go for the middle. Do it or don't do it. Don't take crazy risks, but take positive risks to move forward.
It sounds like Yoda's quote: "Do or do not. There is no try." What's one habit that holds you back the most?
There's little things like I wish I didn't bite my nails. That's what held me back in my kind of career, perhaps. And a bit of kind of looking after myself. I think I used to cycle 30 Ks every day. Football 3 times a week. I get so buried in the work now that I don't make time for that. I think that's
work is the. I hear you. You might have already answered this. What's one thing that pisses you off the most? What's your biggest pet peeve?
Just injustice, inequity.
Yeah.
I think that's wherever I see that. And my little things are things like, when my family loads the dishwasher, like the kind of, I call them raccoons on meth. They call me the, Scandinavian architect. So just loaded the dishwasher.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. But in injustice, and I think integrity is probably the other thing that...
It is. I mean, the injustice, we could talk about that for ages. That is some of the structural things that we've got around how education's funded, which I feel like is unjust across the country. I think about it every day. It just niggles at me every day.
If you could pay someone to do one of your chores, which one would it be? The dishwasher?
It'd be reloading the dishwasher after the raccoons have been in there. Yeah.
What's one word that you absolutely hate?
There's so many, but one of the things that I kind of pick up every time is when people say it can't be underestimated how important this is. Yeah. That's not what you're saying. You're saying that's the opposite to what you mean. It can't be overestimated how important. Right. Well, people say it just even kind of on the news, and people say it the wrong way around. And every time it just kind of grabs hold of me.
Yeah, because they've heard it time and time again, right?
Yeah. That's right.
What's the first thing that you would do if you became invisible?
You know what I'd do? I'd follow kids around. And that sounds creepy.
Yeah, that's not.
So let me be clear about what I mean.
We might need to edit that.
I know what I mean is, I think kids these days have lives that we don't really get.
Yeah.
Especially kids in more disadvantaged backgrounds with kind of challenges going on. And I think I'd document it, and I'd want to show it to people and say, this is what kids' lives look like. Especially in our schools where we've got the kind of concentration disadvantage and some of those challenges. When I go and visit schools, I get to talk to kids, but, I'm a visitor and I'm a middle-aged bloke turning up and say, who's this bloke asking questions about my learning? I'd want to really be able to see and reveal to others the lives that kids lead, because I think that would activate us in a way that, we're just not activated as a community at the moment.
Yeah, that's cool. And last one, what is your best dad joke?
Oh, no. I'll tell you the one that used to drive my kids crazy. They're old now, but would be, I'd say, can you put the kettle on? It'll really suit you.
That's horrible.
It's horrible.
That's like the butter on the bread. Brilliant. Look, thank you so much for your time today, Martin. It's been amazing hearing your thought process around both education, change, transformation, everything else that goes with it. Your background, your career is something I think we are very lucky to have you here leading our education department here in South Australia. I know I speak on behalf of the public when I say it's exciting to hear about all the changes and choices that you are making for the department and just education in general. I hope to continue to see this have a profound impact on the world. But it's not just about South Australia. It is about how can we create more learners, create more people with who are curious and really trying to innovate and change the way things are done. So kudos for everything that you're doing.
Oh no, thanks, Dan. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Brilliant. That's it from us. We'll catch you next time. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening to the podcast all. You can check out the show notes if there was anything of interest to you and find out more about us at SynergyIQ.com.au. I am going to ask, though, if you did like the podcast, it would absolutely mean the world to me if you could subscribe, rate, and review. And if you didn't like it, that's all right too. There's no need to do anything. Take care, guys. All the best.